Hi there,
Okay.
welcome to the meetup for September, what is today, the 14th of 2022? Is it still 2022? I wasn't sure. Time seems to be going by so fast. We have the small business meetup today. This is regarding small model shops. And I would like to introduce Jill Kennick, who is on our board, has been a past president, past vendor VP. She's held a lot of roles and is just a very strong supporter of the APMM and all that we do and what we stand for. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jill.
Great, thanks. And thanks for everyone that's joined us today. I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves because in order to start the conversation, I've asked them each to share a struggle that they've successfully overcome. And we're going to just let this session kind of go organically and talk about what points happen to interest everyone. I am Jill Kennick. My primary business outside of being APMM heavy for the past couple of years is as the owner and sole model maker for Acropolis Studios Model Works. I've been in that business for more than 25 years. I started out as a solo shop, slowly expanded up to 5 model makers and 2 support staff. Had an opportunity about 8 years ago for a lifestyle change where we left New England and moved to the Midwest. Acquired a property that had a 2,000 square foot workshop 3 minutes from the house. Wow. So we kind of shifted gears and tried to slow things down a little bit. I found that managing a model shop was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to make models. To my heart, I'm a maker. And so it was a lifestyle choice to really get back into the hands-on work. I specialize primarily in consumer products, a lot of small metal goods. I do some architecture, which was interestingly a spin-off from small metal goods, but I just fell into it and you know, I'm light on my feet, I move fast, so I took advantage of an opportunity. Very important to my business is for me to be part of my customers' pre-production team. I don't want to just make a model and put it in a package and send it off. I want to help them figure out how it's going to be made. I want to talk to the designers. I want to talk to the guys that are polishing the piece. I want to be part of their process, and that gives me very good customer relations. My biggest struggle is scheduling. It's always been the biggest struggle, but as a one-person shop, you go from, you know, showing up in the morning wondering if you're going to be in business the next week to being booked out 6 months and having, you know, no time to run the 3 minutes home to get dinner with the family. So I'd love to solve that, but I'm not sure it's solvable. One thing that I guess I've come to accept on the advice of my accountant is this is the game I signed up for. So it's a 24/7 job. COVID kind of drilled that point home when so many corporate model shops and designers were working from home, kind of threw out the 9-to-5 job. So I've pulled the plug on my landlines. Everybody gets my cell phone number, and my cell phone is with me 24 hours a day. And I get calls on Sunday afternoons and Friday evenings, and it's all okay. It's just you know, it's the show I signed up for. So I appreciate the flexibility, except when I don't appreciate the flexibility. So with that, I'll pass over to Dave Laverick and let him introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Dave Laverick. I'm currently retired. Started out working for a model shop that some of you might know the name of. Dave Osment was the model maker in Kansas City, and he quickly shifted into a company called Woodland Scenics, making landscape material and scenic details for HO train hobbyists. And that was my first real job in Kansas City, is making patterns for that company. We would make them I would make them in wax or styrene, then we'd go to a lost wax, and then we would go to the centrifugal casting process. And I really got an appreciation for that. And that kind of got into my blood, just being able to go from something like a wax to mass production. They moved out of Kansas City area and put me in a unemployment situation. We started a little company, a design model shop with a friend of mine. who I went to school with, and it was a short-lived company. We started it during the 80s recession, and we just couldn't get it off the ground. We closed shop, and in about a year, the business started picking up again, and my phone started ringing. I retained the phone number for the business. And in about a year, my wife asked me, are we looking for a job or are we starting a business? And I was working out of my garage at the time. And I said, I think we're starting a business. So we went ahead and bought a home with a little more space. I started a company called Dimensional Communications. And we served a variety of clients. It was just a wonderful learning experience, starting it in the basement with one employee. A lot of our business was engineering and architectural, but we fell into the industry of gas research, learning how to harvest gas from the earth. And we ended up serving what is no longer Gas Research Institute, and that became one of our prime customers. But we maintained other relationships in the city, Hallmark and some other folks. We eventually connected with Garmin, which is the company that I eventually went to work for. And Garmin really, they had this explosive growth, obviously, as they started out. And we were a part of that. We handled many aspects of their needs, the design, the model making, the trade shows, some of the print media, the photography. So my little company in the basement exploded to about 14, 15 people in a fairly short period of time. When Garmin started to vertically integrate, a lot of that business went away. And eventually the founder of Garmin, who I knew before Garmin, asked me to join Garmin. So we sold our business at just the right time, I think.
Hey, Dave. Oh, there we go. Your sound cut out. Okay, go ahead.
And we went and, we went to work for Garmin, putting together a creative engine. First, it was mainly models, and then we started doing some design work. And that was a constant growth over a 10-year period. And when I stepped out of the management role, about 15 years later, the team was well over 30 people, designers and model makers. I retired in 2013 and just recently started picking up the desire to start another little business called Real Small Lumber. And it's essentially finding wood, recycled wood mostly, that has a really, really fine grain. I mean, we're talking 50 thousandths between growth rings, and it has a lot of great character to it. So I'm in the process of putting a little business together to provide materials for model builders that are looking for that little extra in what they make.
Thank you.
I think the challenge, for me, the challenge was I am very empathetic, and it was difficult for me to keep the business relationship simple. I wanted to give too much of myself to the relationship many times. I was always looking for options when I should have kept it simple. I had a hard time charging the right amount of money. I wanted to make sure that everybody won. I was usually the one that didn't win. My wife was the one that didn't win because I was giving this stuff away when I was first starting out. And I think that just the whole idea of having to ask for money was always hard for me. I love the work. I love providing the product. There was times when we would present the model or the product to the client. It was the first time they actually had a chance to see their vision. And many of them would literally cry when they saw what it is that they've been thinking about for so many years. So I had a hard time keeping the business relationship simple. I could talk more about that, but that was my biggest challenge.
Thanks. Kick it over to Matt.
Hey, everyone. I'm happy to be here. My name is Matt Neidhart, and I work at Fresco Design, which is a product design consultancy in Marlborough, Massachusetts. Worked here for over 2 years now, and I've been helping to set up a new model and prototype shop, which includes woodworking equipment, 3D printing lab, and soft goods as well. Also, we've got a paint room for spray finishing. So it's been really exciting to just be involved on that and really designing and building out a new space for this purpose. I think that probably one of the trickiest challenges I face is in terms of short run production, or sorry, short run prototyping for a client when they want, let's say, something over a dozen or more parts or models. We always have to decide, does it make sense to try to build this in-house because we've got a few SLA 3D printers, which we use often for that kind of work, or should we try to outsource this and get parts that are more finished so there's less processing, and we're kind of like painting and assembling, testing from there. So we always try to evaluate what's the most efficient and cost-effective way to get this project done for the client. And those things kind of can go head to head sometimes. So it's tricky because there are trade-offs and pros and cons to doing the work yourself or outsourcing some of it as well.
Okay, thanks. And Diane, if you could go ahead and intro yourself.
Hello, everyone. As with many in APMM, my background is in 3D design and manufacturing. My education path began at the University of Minnesota in fine arts, and then I switched to product design, machine tool technology, and ended up at Bemidji to finish off with applied engineering degree. But my career has had 9 lives. I started out as a small business owner and in product design and manufacturing, and then shifted to the corporate world. But the industries that have been in that have been ranged quite a bit. So I started out doing orthodontic appliance manufacturing, and then model making, jewelry design, consumer products. And then probably my most rewarding role was in serving the design community, making as a product manager in a CAD software solution provider. And now I find myself shifting back into small business. So I started up Mind to Matter Design and Technologies this year. And I'm working to support other teams with design and tooling services, training, workflow guidance, wizards, automated scripts for shops that might use Freeform, as well as assisting with just general design services, mesh to CAD, reverse engineering, those sorts of things. In terms of the recent challenges, I suppose there would be 2 that come to mind. But the first one is just starting up a business again after having been out for so many years. But there are benefits from that, and that, well, 3 things come to mind. Things have changed so much. There's so many solutions out there that make the business tasks much easier than they used to be in the past. Anywhere from Zoom and WebEx to secure file sharing and transaction and billing services. And then the other thing is the tools that I use as a product manager have been able to be brought to bear. So I use a lot of feature comparison charts as I made the decisions for what vendors to go with or products to use. And then some things from the corporate world that helped me was basically just knowing to look into the companies you're working with ahead of time. Are they a healthy business? Do they elicit trust? Do they value your input? Do they feel that your success is important to their success? Can you depend on their longevity? Do they have good customer commitment, customer support? Things like that. And there was another one, but we can talk about that one later, I suppose, in the context of the conversation.
Okay, thanks. Before I start rambling on, does anyone here have questions for the panelists? Have you heard anything in particular that you'd like to talk about as a launching point? Anybody want to get this ball rolling? No dice. Okay, well then I'll jump. Dave, you made a point. First of all, we're a fairly small group. If you guys want to unmute, we can try it that way. It may just spur a little bit more spontaneity in our conversation here. Interesting point you made, Dave, is it, and I question, is it a problem to be over involved with your customers? You seem to take exactly the opposite approach that I do, where I want the involvement, not necessarily from an emotional standpoint, but I want to make sure they're getting the best product. And yes, it's impossible to bill for all those hours. I know I give away an awful lot of stuff. I guess that's just kind of, again, the game I signed up for. Why is it that you see that as a problem? I'm curious.
Yeah, well, you wear all those different hats as a business person. It's a small shop. So you're dealing with learning how to estimate, providing leadership for your team members so that they're doing, you know, they're being as efficient as possible. Then you have all of the relationships that you're managing, picking up the new customer and helping them understand what you're doing. You have the ones, your favorite customers that you want to make sure you're taking care of first. Then you have the billing, you know, managing the money side of things. And I think that for me, I did not transition from the different hats very smoothly. I had a tendency to put aside the ones that I didn't feel I connected well with, and I had a tendency to focus on the ones that I love the most. One was the relational side of things, and I could spend a lot of time on the relational side of things and overpromise, frankly, because you want this person, this team to win with, and you know you can help them. So I think overpromising was one of the things that occurs when you get over invested in the relationship, in the emotional part of things. And so I think that's one of the things that I think. The other is, many times the conversations really need to be fairly succinct. You know, this is the process. This is where we're headed with it. This is, you know, when we're going to have it. This is kind of what it's going to look like. And my tendency was to draw the person into a relationship and assume that they want to know a lot more information about, you know, not just the process, but, you know, how I feel about it.
That's a really interesting point. I've actually lost customers because they want to throw it in the bag and, you know, run through the checkout stand.
Yeah.
And it's hard to judge how much information to share.
That's right. Yeah.
Anybody else on that topic? I know, Diane, you're extremely detailed in your proposals. Have you ever had pushback on those, or what motivated you to develop the precision of your explanations?
Yeah, sometimes people don't want to go into that much detail, and sometimes they really appreciate it. So depends on the
I guess
person.
it's just a shot in the dark sometimes, especially on a new customer. How much do they want to know?
Yeah.
Well, Diane, by the sounds of your business, a large part of what you're doing is you're connecting. You're connecting your client who has specific needs with an array of services that you feel will best meet those needs. Is that the way I understand it?
Yeah, and I think that's what I like and I missed about small business is it's completely different in the corporate world.
Oh, yeah.
And I enjoy, and I like that about product management too, working with the customers and helping to see what their needs are, communicating that back to engineering and making sure that what's created is really going to help them. So yeah. It is hard to not become invested.
Alika, I always see you as kind of a bridge And maybe I'm overestimating the size of your model shop, but I was kind of surprised to see you here today. But now I get it, because you work like in a cell inside a larger shop. Are you guided by corporate decisions on when you're estimating and pricing, or what's your system? What's your involvement level?
So it kind of depends. I am very much a bridge. You know, my whole career in former architectural model shops, and here where we're not necessarily a architectural model shop, but we work in support of the architecture and construction process, and conservation and preservation planning process. It kind of depends on which shop I'm working for or with. You know, I'll bid my own jobs for stuff that just stays within design services, which is what we call ourselves. But if I'm doing a 3D scan for architecture, that's, you know, I just get an email saying, please go scan this location. Here's the customer's contact, get in touch with them and schedule that. And I'll just go and do that. And then I hand everything back, you know, once I've got the scan done and the files on the server, I just send a link to architecture, and they take it from there. They handle all the billing and customer relations. It's very dynamic, and it just depends on exactly what they're doing. I mean, there's some stuff, especially with repeat clients. We get a lot of stuff from local sign makers, sign companies, especially if it involves wood, since we have a production wood shop. That communication, that billing, and all that doesn't even get to my boss, Michael Nixon. It stays, all within me and my communications. I'll send out the invoice, order material directly, whatever needs to happen. And there's some jobs I get involved in that involve every single one of our departments, and it would look, lots of meetings, planning, stuff like that. It would look very corporate. And on the same day, it can be a job that involves nobody else in the company but me. So it's a very dynamic thing, but it's part of why I love it here so much.
Cool. Matt, what's your situation? Are you strictly downstream, or are you face to face with customers?
I am face to face with customers. It kind of depends on where Fresco needs me in the process. I usually will be kind of in the middle after the design team is working through concepts and they want to start printing like volume models. Then I'll come in and start to make those or test out different prototypes for them. But in terms of with client proposals, I'll work and I'll work to estimate what it would take for us to create that in-house, or if we have to outsource certain parts of it. And then I'll also write up proposals, and I work back and forth with my managers to basically, show them what I've come up with, what I think the project would take. And then they would go from there and they send that out to the client. Or sometimes I do it as well. But we also have two different approaches for how we bill clients. So we do a fixed fee for smaller projects, maybe a one-off model or a prototype, and that just makes it very clear for the client what this would cost. Otherwise, if we do more in-depth product development work where it's very iterative and we have to experiment with new processes, or if we think it'll be something that is a range of time and we can't really pinpoint what exactly that might be, we have just an understanding that we charge a shop rate and we just bill them directly for the hours. So it kind of depends, but I would say it's kind of an even split of that hourly shop rate versus the fixed fee for client work.
It's interesting. How much did you ever get serious pushback on the hourly rate, where you just have to bill out by the hour because you have no idea how long it's going to take to get through the development process?
Not personally. I think our clients, have an understanding that, we charge what we charge because we're gonna we'll get it done for them when they need it done. That's really the kind of like bread and butter of consulting. Sometimes it's just that we have this target date and we're just going to go for that and we'll do what it takes to get there. So I haven't really encountered much pushback over our hourly fees.
On that note, when it comes to the pushback, when it comes to this, the delta grows between what you think the customer was expecting and what it ends up. One of the things that I remember having difficulty with is just being honest about it. This is what it cost us. And it reminded me of a time when we did some work for Gary Burrell, who was the founder of Garmin. And I worked directly with him for a number of years, and he pushed back on pricing of something. And as hard as it was, I had to kind of, in a way, kind of scold him because of what he was asking for was pretty substantial. And what we charged him for, again, like you said, Jill, we give a lot of it away. I made a lot of concessions. So I just ended up having to write a letter, and I was being very honest and from my heart. And he came back with, I am so sorry. You're valuable. It was worth it. Don't worry about it. So, of course, I think one of the things I'm hearing over and over again is, with regard to process, it kind of depends.
Mhm.
I'm hearing that a lot, and I think at the end of this meeting, we'll probably say that came up quite a bit, which is, the nature of our work.
Lisa, I see you nodding and shaking in agreement. Do you want to share anything on this topic? Because I know you've got to be facing all these same challenges.
Oh yeah. I was just thinking of one of my biggest challenges, I guess, that sort of presses a button for me with clients, and they rarely press my buttons, but somebody that will decide the value of a model, like after the fact or based on their concept from 15 years ago and stuff like that. You just feel it's so crushing sometimes. It's like, gosh, we're not getting rich. I don't know a rich model maker, but I don't know. I was just thinking of that, how like it is such a challenge sometimes to really communicate and not convince clients, but have them see the reality of what it takes to develop a model, sometimes to the degree of detail, the functionality, the structural, don't you feel like engineers and, chemists sometimes, and, structural engineers and artists, like it has to look right and feel right and be right in every way. And I don't know, I just think there's a bigger value to that than a lot of people realize. I always dream of like somebody going, oh yeah, of course, model makers extremely valuable because we are decreasing in number, especially in the US.
Yeah.
So we should all be really loaded right now with cash, because how many people can do what we can do, really, compared to 25, 30, 40 years ago. I started 42 years ago. So, big difference. There were dozens and dozens of people in the model shops, and now there's like one or two of us.
I remember distinctly the first time I fired a client, and there was just, and I had to be all grown up. I mean, I must have been 45 before I did it. And I agonized over it for weeks, but I mean, she was pushing all my buttons, and nothing was ever good enough, and the communication was never clear enough. And I finally just washed my hands. I said, I can't do that. I can't work for you anymore.
Wow.
And got all offended, and we separated in a huff. And 6 months later, Dave, bless the letter the response you got from the head of Garmin. 6 months later, she came back and said, we're going to get this right. We're going to work on the relationship, and we're going to get it right. Would you please reconsider this? But it's a rare time. It's a tricky balance because, oh my gosh, I haven't booked something for next week yet. Do I lower my guard? Or do I take an afternoon off and sleep late and go play in the garden? And I don't know. And it's the hardest part of being a grown-up model maker is figuring out when to say no.
Yeah. Well, that's the emotions that I was talking about.
Mhm.
The emotions have a tendency to make our work difficult.
Yeah. Do you run into that, Michael, or do you punch out at 5 and go home?
I mean, I get invested in some projects more than others. I mean, it's kind of the nature in a way, just because of the SKUs of products we make, you look at the same watch through 7 different deviations over the course of years, and it's just like, okay, it's that watch. But every once in a while, you have a new one show up, something different, a shape that really is compelling or whatever. And it's like, you actually want to spend that little extra time exploring it. And, the clock tends to kind of just disappear at that point or whatever. You kind of get stuck in a unique challenge or something. Or, some other department asks for some bizarre thing that you've never done before, never seen before. And those kind of projects really do kind of, light a fire under you a little bit just for the sake of the novelty involved. So, yeah, I mean, I do see that. I mean, emotion definitely does have its place even in a corporate shop. So
Interesting. So how do you guys know when to holler for help? I'm involved right now in a project, and I brought Diane on board because it was over the top. It was just over the top. It was too much, and it was a hard decision to make. But just the required pace of it and the demands of my client put on me to manage things outside of the model making field. I found that I finally had to just let go of a piece of it. So how easy is it for folks to job out, hire out, throw something off to an unknown factor?
I think,
APMM has always, somebody along the way today has said that APMM really gives a good backup for small shops, and that's absolutely true. I mean, I found Diane through APMM. I've found other shops from time to time when I really needed a bailout that could jump up and kind of on a job by job basis. The current relationship is much more long term. But I'm curious, how often you guys have to reach out? How often do you realize that it's just above and beyond you and you want to do the job anyhow? Anyone want to jump on that one?
I can kind of speak to that in the construction industry and subs. There's a lot that we'd like to keep in house and do in house, but it just makes more sense to hire somebody that's generally going to be a little bit faster, less expensive, and do just as good, if not a better job. Yeah, we run into that a lot, but that's construction industry. That's a common thing in that industry. For model makers, I don't think that's quite as common.
It's interesting. You guys, I actually had a small graphic design project a couple of years ago, and I actually reached out to the name of the company I used was Upwork, and it's a pool of talent. And you post up your job and post up your budget, and you just you get a couple of answers back. Yeah, I can help you out with that, or a simple graphic. I found also I needed some help with networking computers, and I knew exactly what the problem was. I knew just enough to be dangerous, and was pretty successful in finding an IT guy out of Florida that could dial in and walk me through the repairs I needed. So I couldn't find anyone directly local to help me out. You guys had any experience on that direction? Is that a resource anybody is aware of? Because it worked great for me. No?
I've never used Upwork myself, but I do have a former coworker that went out on her own and initially signed up on Upwork and got a bunch of work right out the gate, and now it works full time for maybe 3 or 4 of the clients that that she got through Upwork, and you know, now doesn't do anything with Upwork, is dedicated to those 3 or 4 clients, and that's all she can handle.
Wow. That's interesting. I didn't think about putting myself up that way.
Yeah.
I had a friend from college who did a similar thing where he was doing graphic design and branding and packaging through Upwork, or it might have been Fiverr. That's another freelance site. And he worked directly with a company for well over half a year. So I think there are definitely some good opportunities to find talent or shorter term help through those channels. We also reached out to a local CNC operator, kind of a woodworker, fabricator for some machining, but we're still setting up our router here. So that's been really great. And a lot of those connections that at least we find locally actually come through a makerspace. So in Framingham, which is about an hour west of Boston, there's a big makerspace, and there are a lot of people who use a lot of equipment that I use, and use different machines, or they know how to with like code or write scripts for Arduino, Raspberry Pi. So that's a great resource too, because we have this email where you can just send it out and say, hey, there's a short-term gig here, anybody interested? And it's a good network to have. So makerspaces are really great for that kind of
I absolutely
collaboration.
Basis. I guess I look down my nose at them usually. That there are a bunch of high school kids that don't know their way around, and I guess that's not fair. Bruce, you're probably cringing, but
I definitely feel like I can understand like where that sentiment can come from, and sometimes it's like a makerspace can feel a little disorganized or kind of like a free for all. But I found that there are a lot of different people, all age groups there working there, and different interests too. So it's a fun place to go time to time, and
it's a great idea,
and see what people are working on. So
yeah,
it's a good resource. There's one in your area.
Yeah.
Go check it out, I think, because like I was saying, there's a huge variety of them. One I worked for after I got laid off at Ziba, I worked there for a while and ran their 3D printer business for them, which was a really small endeavor. But the makerspace itself had all these people working, professional machinists and woodworkers and everyone. They each had their own little stall where they're doing their own thing, and they would collaborate. And they made a giant pedal pub Zeppelin for South by Southwest. And they just all got together and, okay, we're going to make a giant Zeppelin on top of a pedal pub. And here's what we're going to do. And they all brought in their special skills and did it. And it was, they wanted, the people that wanted that pub first asked my shop at Ziba to do it. And we couldn't because it was too big a thing, but those guys could. And then I worked with another makerspace in Birmingham that was more like a bunch of guys hanging out doing their hobbies. And yeah, you'd have trouble getting them to sit down in the same room and talk about whose turn it was to clean up.
let's go.
I think that modern technologies have made reaching out a little easier and a little more sure. My history was, as I remember it, the deadlines and the price was always fairly tight, and to add another part to the process, put yourself at risk if they didn't deliver, or they just couldn't deliver in the time that you made your promise for. Found it very difficult to farm out, with some exceptions. But I think that the nature, goes back to, it kind of depends. If you have long lead times on your work, I think it's a lot easier. If you got your short lead times and you're really pushing for making any money on the deal, farming things out has a tendency to slow things down and complicate the process. And that was my experience.
Yeah, I think you have a good point that it has a lot to do with the nature of the business. I tend to be on smaller projects with shorter deadlines. Gratefully, I'm on one now that's a very large product with a very long deadline, which is it's a delightful change of pace around here. But yeah, it's trying to find that, like, hey, can you do this tonight? Diane, you've gotten a couple of my can you do this tonight calls, and fortunately have responded well. But anybody else on that topic? Okay, anybody want to toss anything out that we haven't talked about?
Yeah, I'm itching to ask a question, and you might have this in your queue. You started out by asking what was our challenges. Some of us have been at it for a while. I'd love to know what y'all would have done differently now that you have some history in the work. That you think might, hindsight, what you could have done that might have made your life a little better today if you had focused on some things earlier.
It's interesting. I don't know, Dave. I guess I would have to get a little philosophical on that one. I think it's being in small business. It's kind of cool to be light on my feet.
Yeah.
So I see a problem, I diagnose a problem, I solve it, and I don't think looking back I would have necessarily done anything differently. Although it was a big point in my life to come to terms with the fact that I wasn't gonna ultimately have this employee heavy model shop that I really missed making. I didn't want to manage. I liked, that my customers came to me for models because they were coming to me for models, not necessarily a member of my team.
Right.
So I think there's a little self-honesty that has to take place, at least in my life. I think it's also important that I'm not looking for the whole pie. I'm just looking for a little sliver to support myself comfortably. That there's a lot of model work out there.
Yep.
As I'm closer to retirement than I am to the beginning of things, I don't know. I think it's just I think I'm in it for self-satisfaction. I think a lot of model makers, regardless of their corporate or small businesses, are in it because we are passionate about what we do.
Right.
So
I think that's well said. You've been very careful about you chose what you wanted to do, and you were disciplined about keeping it small. And that's really hard to do when there's so many things that you can make, and so many.
Out of college, I came out of college in the mid 80s where women were supposed to work and ladder climb. And, I showed up for work in a suit and heels, and I quickly found out that wasn't me, but there's value. It's a lifelong learning process.
Yeah.
And a lot of self-honesty. So I don't know if that's other small business owners feel the same way.
I think we've kind of touched on the fringes of it a little bit, and Jill, you were getting here at it earlier, but one of the hardest things I've had in my career and just in general is just how and when to say no to something. I've also, had opportunities to really let myself shine by saying yes to something and getting way in over my head.
Yeah.
And coming out on top. It makes you look great, but that's where that dedication and those late nights come in. But I'd be interested to hear other people's experiences and how they handle with just saying no, whether it's the job, the type of work, the budget, the schedule, the client, what factors come into just saying no to that.
I'm curious, Michael, do you get a chance to say no?
It has been exceptionally rare in the time I've been here that I've ever just kind of laid a line in the sand on something. I can maybe once or twice. But yeah, I mean, when it's coming down from so far above, usually, I mean, everything is in that corporate line. You're kind of just like, well, it needs to be done. Somebody above feels it's important to be done. So, I mean, usually we will try to move heaven and earth. If it's a directive, we just do it. There are occasional times we've had to for whatever reason, but it's usually a very good reason. Like, we simply cannot do that. And that's often where, you know, back to what you were talking about with outsourcing. I mean, even we do that. I mean, sometimes we have to, you know, if it's one of those deals where they need appearance models in 2 weeks and we simply can't, you know, if we were to just line the parts up on the machines and run it day and night, the math just doesn't add up. You know, the one thing we can't change is time. So we can't manufacture that. So, you know, there are times when we have to, you know, put our ego aside, even though we'd like to do the work all in-house. Sometimes you just gotta say, nope, that other group, you know, is gonna be able to help us fulfill that. You know, it's the only way it's getting done. So shop that part out or whatever. But yeah, saying no, it's pretty rare in our shop, I think. Lanson may give you a different opinion, though. I'm not always privy to those decisions, you know, on the management level. So.
Anybody else on that one? We're sneaking up here. We've got about 10 minutes left. So I just want to open it up, and any questions, as broad reaching as you care to toss out there. Anything that you were passionate about finding an answer to when you showed up here today. We'd love to hear it.
I think, Jill, you may have touched on this before, or maybe some other folks have as well, but I think scheduling it can be very challenging, especially when you have multiple projects simultaneously. So does anybody have any kind of suggestions for project management or scheduling software they use that they like or they found helpful?
And we use Jira. We've been using that in the shop for a long while, but don't know, you know, how scalable that is or whatever. It seems very modular, sometimes to its detriment, I would say. I mean, I've not had to go into the back end of it and do any tinkering, but we have an on-site person that, you know, for Garmin, that's all they do is handle Jira, you know, configuring the modules and all that stuff and optimizing for each team. It works pretty well for us. I think Confluence is the company that makes it, but that might be worth looking into.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I love Jira and Confluence. Yeah, I think Atlassian is the parent company.
Ah, yes, Atlassian, you're right. That's the one.
Well, I really prefer a white marker board. And I say that with my tongue in my cheek, but one of the challenges is to make sure everybody can at a glance see where things are at. And some folks have a way of ignoring the stuff on the computer, but just having a simple glance at it, usually you can tell whether you're in trouble or not, or you need to ask for help, or whether you can take the evening off by just looking at the marker board and having people take responsibility for making sure that's updated, which you as a manager at a glance could see that it's not being managed. So sometimes it's just a real simple. And if you're just a 1 or 2 man shop, that's probably all you need.
Yeah, the whiteboard's been pretty essential in just having the visual checklist and
That's right.
knowing that you thought of everything along the way.
Yeah, I'm just like Dave there. you know, we've got we just use Office 365 calendar for kind of company-wide scheduling. And you know, that syncs to my phone, but I rely on that as, you know, ding, hey, you got to be in a meeting in 15 minutes. It's just that last minute reminder, hey, you got to be here now. But for anything that's going to require preparation, or I need to kind of keep in my mind more important stuff, I keep on a calendar, you know, just to the right of my computer screens, where multiple times a day I'm seeing that that's there, and it's a reminder, you've got this coming up and you can't miss it.
I actually run a variant on that. I have project boxes, 3 stacks on my desk, you know, do next week, do 2 weeks out, do 3 weeks out. All the components are stacked together, and it gives me a visual, and it's just a 3D whiteboard is what it is.
Yeah.
That's been pretty useful for me.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Any other questions? Any other pressing questions?
Jill, I'd like to hear, and anybody else here, I just know, Jill, you are rather remote, am I correct, in location?
Yes.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about the unique challenges that has, because I've always worked, you know, in a city or an industrial area. Yeah, and anybody else here that is in a remote location, and I know internet is just the beginning of those problems.
Anybody else want to jump on that one? Anybody else incredibly remote?
You
It
have
was-
some good stories still.
And it was a factor when we decided to move here. My business had organically hit the point where I was shipping every day. So as long as UPS and FedEx could make it to my door, or you know, on a winter day, I could make it to the nearest drop point up the street. It worked. The biggest challenge when we made this decision, internet was not as essential to running a business as it is now. Phone lines were the key. Phone lines and snail mail and fax machines. At the time we've been here, that has changed. Yeah, we just crazy story, but we just got Elon Musk Starlink system in at the beginning of the summer, and being the one person shop with a very supportive husband, we actually had to run an electrical cable across a small lake in a rowboat in order to get power out to an open space on the corner of the levee, because we had too much blockage for the internet. We started with it mounted. We dropped a half a dozen trees and put it up on the roof of our house based on their viewpoint system, and found out that their viewpoint system was wrong. You didn't really need this angle. You really needed this angle of clear view sky. And the only place on the property to do that was 800 feet across the lake. And I mean, we were desperate. We were desperate human beings. Dave also works out of the house, and you know, you get an upload speed of like 0.2. And you know, internet downloads take 26 hours. You know, so we were desperate. After 14 months, our turn came and we got our equipment. But that was one for the books. Me in a rowboat with a cable tied around my waist, rowing across the lake, him yelling at me because I couldn't row against the weight of the cable that I was dragging. It took some creative majiggling. He finally tied a rope onto the rowboat, and he helped me guide it across, and it's working. And the snapping turtles haven't cut the cable yet, which is something else we're waiting for. And but it's been a blessing to finally get decent internet up and down. But beyond that, from COVID standpoint, we couldn't have been in a better situation.
Yeah.
We had no COVID disruptions. We are isolated here, which is a skill in and of itself. Learning to work alone, it can be tricky. For anybody that's thinking about jumping into this, my dog comes to work with me, and sometimes it'll go days. If Dave's out of town, he may be the only thing I talk to, and that's a skill set that you have to be honest with yourself and develop.
Yeah.
Can you live with yourself?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I would agree. You really have to like yourself. You have to be your own best friend and best workmate for that to work.
Yeah. So, anything else? We're rolling up against the hour. Any other last minute questions?
Well, I want to make a comment. Someone said that there's no rich model makers. That might be a blessing in itself. We really love what we do. We have a fire in our belly that we just want to build. And there's just so many people that are working jobs that, I remember Min, my boss and the co-founder of Garmin. He very honestly came to me one day and looked at me and he said, Dave, you have the best job in the company. And he was right. So I think that don't be comparing yourself with others because you're a rare breed. That's why I think APMM is so important. Having a community that you can connect with is really critical, because especially if you're a small shop.
That's a really good point. So I wanted to ask, do you guys know of any model makers that are looking for work?
Not off the top of my head.
Offhand.
I've got a room full of students.
Well, it depends on their skills.
Yeah, working on the skills. We're going to talk about small feature sizes today, and yeah, So eventually I'll crank out employees for you, but it'll take a while.
That's good.
You're
Okay,
in the Bay Area, right, Lisa?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
I don't know anybody out in that end of the country. Sorry.
that's okay.
Rick, where are you? You're in Minnesota?
In Minnesota, I'm Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. It's a northwest suburb of the Twin Cities.
Okay.
And it's kind of funny, when I saw Diane today, I didn't recognize her name. And as soon as I heard her voice, I'm like, she took a class from me. And when she talked about machining, I sent an email over to Dick and I said, Dick, I found Diane, and he showed up with a picture and he said, this is what she made in my lab. And so missing about like how awesome it was to have her as a student.
Yeah.
So
Cool. I'm
You're
glad you
doing
jumped on
important
with us
work
today.
there.
I'm
That's
glad
great.
I came in today
Look at
too.
this.
Hey, Michael, your lips are moving, but there's nothing coming out.
Any better?
Got you now.
I just wanted to chime in real quick and thank Rick for that education side of things. It's always that's an important part of this, you know.
Yeah.
Or we may be a smaller field of industry than we, were in the past, but, propagating those skills is pretty important. So thank you for doing that.
Yep. You're welcome. And in a way, I feel like I got the best job in the whole building, to be able to work with 3D printers and laser cutters and, make fun stuff.
Okay, well, thanks to everyone for participating today. I hope those that joined us are taking away some good tidbit. I think I am for sure. If nothing else, but reassurances that I'm not the only one having these experiences. So, Michael, we have another meetup coming up in about 2 weeks that should be pretty good. It's saws.
Yeah, it'll be specifically edge tool maintenance with Miles Hale and a friend of his, Dave Brecher, who I don't know specifically where he works, but I believe he actually designs saw blades. So he's going to be giving us some serious detail about how to maintain and sharpen saw blades and edge tools in general. So, and that's on September 29th at 3 p.m. Eastern.
That's a Thursday.
Stay tuned for that.
Okay, guys. Well, thanks again. Appreciate it. Good to see everyone.
Thank you so much.